Welcome to episode 49 of the Camerosity Podcast, the world's highest rated open source film photography podcast. My name is Mike Ekman, and tonight we're going to venture into the wonderful world of half-frame 35mm cameras. How many people will join us tonight? Will it be like the Greyflex episode with 19 people, or will it be like the last episode with only 3? No one knows. Before we find out, though, how about some introductions? From the lower half of the Earth's hemisphere is our resident Aussie Rules half-frame expert, Theo Panagopoulos. Hey Theo, did Snyder ever make a half-frame camera?
No, they did not. But if they did, I would be looking for that one as well, with about the same percentage of success rate as what I am for the actual Snyder itself.
Next, from Gainesville, Florida, is a man who can't seem to find an Agate 18, Mr. Anthony Rue. How has the search been for this extremely high-quality precision Soviet half-frame camera?
You know, they're out there and they're in the Ukraine, and I want to support Ukrainian sellers, but boy, have the prices doubled in the last 4 years, and I'm just not sure I want to splash out $100 on that little piece of plastic.
So what you're saying is you need the prices to drop in half, right?
Yeah, more or less. I remember that I bought my first one in East Germany in 1989 for $20 US.
And finally, from Yellow Springs, Ohio, a man who, if you halved the number of cameras he has for sale, he'd still be the show's leading gas dealer, Mr. Paul Reibold. Paul, do you even have any half-frame cameras in the glass cabinet in your living room?
I have at this point 0. Well, no, I shouldn't say that because I do have the Mercury. I have a Mercury. That would count.
All right. I was going to say if you have 0 and have it, you still have 0.
I think I have a Foth Derby, which takes 127 but makes 24 by 36 images. So does that qualify as a half frame?
If we get into half frame, into anything other than 35mm, boy, will we have a lot of errata for next time. All right. What a fun last episode we had. Although not a ton of people joined us to talk about it, we had great feedback from you guys. Lots of people tuned in to download the show, so thank you guys for listening. So much to talk about with Konica. We don't have a specific brand in mind tonight, but we'll just talk about all the different half-frame cameras. We have a few people in the waiting room, so let's let them in. All right. We have some returning listeners. Back from last week is Ray Nason. Hey, Ray, how you doing?
Hey, good evening. How are you?
All right. Brian Howard's back. Hey, Brian.
Hey.
Awesome. We have Phil C. Phil, I don't recognize your name. Is this the first time you've been on the show?
No, I was on the digital one a few weeks ago.
That's right. Well, introduce yourself.
My name's Phil, avid camera collector, obviously. I'm in the Facebook groups a lot. Excited to talk about some half-frame cameras.
Awesome. And I see, I'm really sorry, I'm not going to say this right. Keir Frei, is that right?
Pretty close. Keir Frei.
Keir Frei. Keir, where are you from?
Ipswich, Australia.
Oh, all right.
Oh.
Theo's not alone tonight.
It depends what football team he follows, whether we kick him out or not, though.
We had a chat about this. I've been under a pseudonym on Facebook, so we were talking about Lions versus Demons.
Oh, no. He's a northerner.
All right, so we're going to start with half-frame discussions. You know, it wouldn't be a Camerosity podcast if I didn't drone on a little bit of history. One thing that I think is important to know, we always say half-frame, 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 but the reality is people didn't actually call what we call now half-frame cameras until about the 60s. It wasn't until 1959 Olympus released the pen, and that sort of reignited interest in what we call half frame, which is 18 by 24mm, 35mm film. Prior to the war, though, you have a lot of cameras, a lot of American cameras, some made in Germany that shot the exact same size, like the Mercury 1, the Mercury 2. Ansco had the Memo. There was actually an Agfa Memo that shot the same size. And while the size is approximately the same, back then they would have called that single frame. So the origins of 35mm film in still cameras goes back to old cinema film, which originally goes back to Thomas Edison with the kinetoscope, who started off with that double perforated 35mm wide film. Edison's projectors were so popular that in the early part of the 20th century, people attempted to standardize not only the projectors, but the cameras that actually recorded them, because what good is making a motion picture film if no one can display on the type of film that you'd be sending out? So 35mm film quickly became known as cinema film. In Germany, it was Cine or Kine film. And people would record on cinema cameras, and typically, like they still do today, when you're recording motion picture, you need large reels, 100 foot, 400 feet. I think some even come 1,000 feet. And if you think about what it's like to record a motion picture, you got the camera rolling. You don't want to be in the middle of a scene when you run out of film. So the camera operator would use a foot meter that would measure how many feet of film was left. And when they got close to the end of the roll, they would stop. And rather than risk running out of film in the middle of a scene, they would usually swap out what was left, maybe 50 or so feet of the film, put it in a new roll. And that they would take out the unused portion, and sometimes they'd throw it away. Sometimes they'd find other uses for it. But eventually those, we call them short ends, people started picking them up and saying, well, what can we do with this film? And some hobbyists started figuring out, well, hey, let's take single pictures films with them. Let's make cameras, still cameras that could use this film. Oscar Barnack did that in 1913 with the original Leica prototype. He wanted to create a camera that could actually test, shutters, exposures. People call it the exposure tester camera. That's debated. But essentially, some of the original cameras, like the QRS de Vries, the Tourist Multiple, there are a bunch of other ones. There was a French camera. So anyway, so the earliest cinema cameras used 35 millimeter film. And because they shot 18 by 24, that's how the still cameras did it too. It was actually Barnack was one of the people who really pushed for what they call double frame. So double frame is what we consider normal. They doubled the width of 18 millimeters and made it 36 millimeters. So you had 24 by 36. So you had double frame cameras and you had single frame cameras.
If I can interrupt you for just a second I've got to put my film studies PhD to some good use.
Go ahead.
Even before Edison, the first motion picture device was from the Lumiere brothers. It's called the cinematograph. And the thing that was cool about the cinematograph is that the camera was also the projector.
Right.
So that you would take the device out during the day and shoot your film with it. And then at night, you would bring it back, develop your film, put a light source in it, and project it onto the screen through the camera.
Yeah.
Which was just like the coolest thing, I thought. That's really how film, spread around the world, was through the cinematograph.
Yeah. I mean, it was a huge hobbyist market. If the internet existed back then, I imagine there would have been Facebook groups of people figuring out ways to cobble together cameras using short ends of film. Eventually, 35 millimeter caught on. It ended up becoming the dominant style of film shortly after World War II. The need for these smaller single frame cameras started to disappear. The Mercury was made after World War II, but it died off about 1950. A lot of those early pre-war cameras all got discontinued. And basically by the 50s, if you shot 35 millimeter, it was just double frame. And since there was no reason to call it double frame anymore, that just became normal. And then when Maitani created the Olympus pen, which was originally called the Olympus 18, but when he released that in 59, it started to catch on in Japan. Film was still super expensive then. And a huge number of Japanese companies started making these half frame cameras. So even though the film size is pretty close to the same, and I say pretty close because like the Mercury's film gate's actually 17 millimeters wide. It's not 18. Some of those cameras are off by a millimeter or two, but we'll just say close enough. If there's any takeaway from my long diatribe there is when you're referring to a camera like the Mercury or any of the pre-war cameras that we call half frame now, the proper term for the analytical experts would be single frame cameras, but doesn't matter. We still call them all together. You get extra exposures. We've talked before how the photo finishers hated them, but that's enough from me. That concludes the historical segment of the show.
Well, let me ask you another historical question just to get it out of the way, because it'll probably come up in the group at some point. I've got a number of Voigtlander buses that I still have the original masking frame, so that the camera is at 6x9, but then it has, like multiple windows, and it has these frames, these masks that drop in, so that I get 16 645 images out of a roll of 120 as opposed to 8 6x9s. Would you consider that to be a half frame, or is half frame only when you're talking about 35 millimeter film?
For the purposes of this show, we could talk about whatever we want, but to answer the actual question and the way you probably are meaning it, I would say not. And the reason being is that roll film cameras were never designed with a specific aspect ratio in mind. So a 6x4.5, a 6x6, a 6x7, a 6x9, 6x17, regardless of the aspect ratio, if you're referring to 120, to me, those are all correct. Half frames suggest that it's half of something else. And yeah, 6x4.5 is technically half of 6x9. We mentioned in the previous show, when you're talking about the early Japanese 6x4.5 folders, those usually had names like semi-pearl, there was a Petri semi, I think. They just meant semi was their way of saying it's half of 6x9. Kodak, anytime you see the word duo, the duo 620, that means it shoots 6x4.5. So certainly those companies acknowledge that 6x4.5 is half of 6x9, but I don't know if I think that actually qualifies as half frame, because again, that film doesn't have a dedicated, intended exposure size like 35mm kind of does. But they're great cameras. So, I mean, we've talked about the Mercury. I've mentioned a couple of times. Has anybody on the show? We have a new person who joined, Maxwell Whitaker. Welcome to the show, Maxwell. A lot of people have Mercuries, but has anybody here actually shot one?
I've shot one.
You shot one?
Mercury 2.
The Mercury has that hump on the top. For anybody who's not familiar, it looks like it's one of the more iconic looking cameras. Collectors love them simply because they just look so different. What I really love about the camera is the rotary shutter just spins like a huge Pac-Man. If you actually open them up, the shutter kind of looks like Pac-Man with the mouth. And as you change the shutter speed, you're actually not changing the speed that it rotates. You're changing the angle of his mouth. So at the highest speed, the mouth is like a slit. It's almost completely closed. And then at the slower speed, picture Pac-Man's mouth gets really wide and his mouth is wide open. So as the shutter is spinning around, the wider Pac-Man's mouth is, the longer light can pass through the shutter. So hence the slower shutter speed. But you can really feel that the torsion of the shutter spinning, and it has a really distinct like sound as it kind of goes. So from a tactile and an audible experience, they're fun to shoot, but they have great lenses. The Wollensak lenses, most of them said Universal, but there were some that were Wollensak made that are incredibly sharp. So the Mercury 2 is actually designed for normal 35mm. You can actually still shoot the original Mercury, which used a proprietary type of film, but it was still double perforated 35mm. It just had different cassettes that can't be rewound. So if you're clever and you have 2 empty cassettes from original Mercury, you can still shoot those with just bulk 35mm, but it's just easier to shoot the Mercury 2. But if you want to go back to the 30s, it's a great camera.
2 questions, Mike. One, didn't they do like a special World's Fair version of the camera that had like an insanely high shutter speed?
Yeah, in 39, the original Mercury had, so the top speed of the Mercury was 1/1000th of a second. And Universal, the company that made that camera, wanted to kind of show, beat their chest and say, hey, look at us. We have an American-made focal plane shutter with a top speed faster than anybody else had. Well, when they were designing it, it was right before Contax, or Zeiss, I should say. Zeiss had the Contax 2 and 3 with the 1/1250th shutter speed. So the original version of the Mercury only went to 1/1000. But in order to top them, they made a version of that camera called the CC 1500, and they changed the shutter slightly so that the top speed is 1/1500th of a second. They're very rare. They're worth quite a bit of money, and that version with the 1500 top speed is only on the original Mercury. They never made the Mercury 2 at that higher speed. It wasn't very reliable. Do you have one there, Paul?
Like, what was the top shutter speed of the one you were just talking about?
1500 would be the really desirable one, and that's only the original model that had that.
And the 2 goes to 1000, but the 2 then also has a red scale. I don't think you can see it here. On the shutter speed, there's
so the numbers are all in red, or is there just a red little triangle?
No, it's a red area between 1 and 1000.
That's normal. They all have that.
Okay, that's to probably warn you which direction you're going in.
So all the Mercury 2s only go up to 1/1000. Some of the original Mercuries were 1000th, and some of them were 1500. And if you have one with the 1500 top shutter speed, it's worth quite a bit more. From a glance, if you don't look at the Mercury 1 and Mercury 2 side by side, you'd think they look exactly the same. But once you have 2 of them side by side, they're actually quite a bit different. The Mercury 2 is a lot wider. The Mercury 2 also has a separate rewind knob on the front. So like from a glance, like let's say you're browsing a eBay lot of cameras and you see kind of a blurry Mercury in the background, you can easily differentiate the Mercury 1 versus, it wasn't actually called Mercury 1, it was called the Mercury candid camera, but just call it Mercury 1. But you can easily identify that versus the 2 by whether it has the extra rewind knob in the front or not.
And they were all CXs, weren't they?
The 2 was the CX.
CX was the model number of CX.
The original one was called the CC.
The one thing I've noticed about the Mercuries is they all seem to have a really bad finish to them, the ones that are being sold online. The metal seems to have a bit of a problem in terms of aging well. Is that because they half-assed the work they did into the metal.
Well, they had to half their supply of the alloy that they were using for the pre-war models. So all CCs were pre-war, all CXs were post-war. They had to redo after the war because the CC used a type of film that Mercury sourced from a company in Belgium. And after the war, getting anything out of Europe was impossible. So Universal knew that if we're going to continue to sell this camera, we need to adapt it to use regular Kodak 135 cassettes. So that's why they redesigned it as the CX Mercury 2. But another change, Theo, is that they had to change the alloy because the whole body is made out of a solid alloy. And I have the original Mercury CC here, and usually they're pretty shiny. They can still oxidize, so it is possible to see the original Mercury CC with a little bit of oxidation, but it's usually nowhere near as bad as the Mercury 2s. If you can find a Mercury 2 that's not completely corroded, that's pretty rare.
Like mine, like Paul's.
Paul's is pretty good.
Mine is excellent.
Yeah.
Another flaw of both of these is the body covering. On this one, on mine, it's in great shape. It's not peeling at all. But if they peel off, if you've ever seen a Mercury with the body covering removed, you can usually go on eBay and there'll be one or two of them there like that. But there's this weird texture to the metal under it. It's not smooth. It almost looks like they wanted it to not have a body covering, and then at the last minute they added it. But whatever the metal is made out of, it's so bumpy that getting any of the skins that you can buy online to stick to it is incredibly difficult. So Mercuries can be very tricky to reskin if you get them where the original body covering is missing. But if you can find one in nice shape, they're very sexy.
Hey, Ray, have you shot film through yours? Have you processed anything?
It's been 10, 12 years. Yes. It was great. I just picked up a CC and I didn't realize it was a CC until I'm looking at it. It was boxed as well. And I think Mike's the one that identified saying, yeah, that's a pre-war. It looks pretty clean. I was actually disappointed because I don't have the cassettes for it. You know, what's interesting, Mike, is, and guys, the Olympus Pen F series also uses a rotary style shutter, but doesn't have this, it's a very, very small camera.
Right. It's rotary in the sense that something spins around an axis, but the actual design is very, very different.
I agree.
Well, doesn't the Mercury derive from a motion picture projector, sort of like the cinematograph did?
Yes, because Universal primarily was a cinema motion picture camera company. They did make still cameras before the Mercury, the Model A, but they were very, very basic cameras. And when they wanted to make something that was a little bit high end, they went all out and designed. There's an expert on Mercury cameras. She wrote a book, Cynthia Rapinski wrote a book. It's called The Universal Story. I actually tried to get her on the show when we did the Argus episode because she's friends with Mike Reitzma and Phil Sterrett, who was on that episode. Unfortunately, she had some health issues and was unable to participate. But if anybody's interested in Universal, the book doesn't have a ton about the Mercuries. It's more about the company just in general and everything they did. Really, really fascinating. She sells the books on eBay. You're buying straight from her and she'll autograph it for you. Usually the books are like $25-$30. So it's not a huge investment, but if you're interested in Universal Camera Corp, they had a pretty cool story.
Were there any other half-frame American-made cameras?
Would the Ansco Memo count as an American camera?
Yep.
Yes.
Absolutely.
So this is one I bought off Paul, who claims not to have half-frame cameras, but has actually sold me one. But this is, again, a cartridge, works off cartridges. It's actually a very simple cartridge where if you can't find them, you can actually make one yourself. They're pretty straightforward and basically just stick film in it. And it's basically a box camera. It has a top speed of 1/100th of a second and aperture that goes from 6.3 to f/16. I think they're wonderful looking little cameras actually, because they've got the really beautiful viewfinder at the top. I mean, what other camera comes with a little handle as well, so you can actually carry it around with you?
Have you shot it yet, Theo?
No, I have not. I have played with it, but I haven't shot with it.
Yeah, very fun camera. So that camera came out in 2017, and it uses, they called it memo film, which is very, very similar to Agfa's Carat film, where it's cassette to cassette, but it uses just regular 35 millimeter bulk film. If you have two cassettes, or like what Theo said, you can make your own cassette. I think you can actually even fit the Carat cassettes in there. they'll wobble around a little, but they should stay in there. Yeah, you could probably 3D print them because there's no spool. It's just an hollow cassette that film just transports from one to another. And the film advance, it has a very distinct like ratcheting, almost like a shotgun cocking sound. You basically stick your finger in this little like loop and you push down on it and it like ratchets like, and it moves the film from one exposure to another. But since it's 18 by 24, it doesn't have to go very far. The viewfinder's really big and bright on there. For a 1920s camera, it's a joy to use. Does anybody have any other suggestions?
Something that's a little bit interesting to note about the Ansco memo is that from what I recall, they actually made a film strip projector for those, which kind of connects back with the motion picture connection. But it's kind of interesting that maybe prints were not the immediate goal of the memo. I think they called it the memo scope or something like that, if I'm recalling.
You could get a memo projector. So after you had the film developed, you could actually project it back through the camera onto a small screen or something like that, I'd imagine. I've never seen one, but if you read my review on my site, I have a picture of the ad that Ansco advertised the camera, and it mentions the projector optional that you could have bought at the same time too. Mm-hmm.
Since you've actually jumped in here, Maxwell, do you want to introduce yourself because you joined us quite late?
Yeah, I was a little bit late. I was at the Kroger, but I'm Maxwell. Let me think. I live in central Kentucky. I tend to shoot mostly half frame. Actually, I use my Agate 18K, and it's one of the preferred formats actually to enlarge. I don't see a lot of people making enlargements from half frame, but it's very doable. I use a Durst M301 if anybody else has used one of those enlargers.
Maxwell, one of my first gallery shows was work that I shot entirely on the Agate. I'm very partial to that little camera.
I heard that in a previous episode. Those are just phenomenal cameras. I bought mine maybe 3 years ago, and I have kind of a hard time sticking with one camera, but I mean, that is one camera that I can just, anytime I want to put a roll of film through, I keep it with me at all times. I've got a Raleigh 35, which is a great camera, but I mean, I just can't keep it with me as much as I can, that Agate. It's fantastic.
I'm equally passionate about it. I got mine about 2 or 3 years ago as well. And it's the perfect portable camera as far as I'm concerned. It's like you can't beat it for size and it's indestructible.
And that lens really punches above its weight.
And I don't think any other camera really had a similar metering system. I don't think anything else did anything similar to that, unless I'm wrong.
I think there actually were a few. I put together a little bit of a chart for today's talk with some of the smaller cameras. But I believe the Canon Demi had a ring that controlled, the original Demi had a single ring for both aperture and shutter speed, kind of on a program setting. I've never seen one in person though, so I don't know if anybody else can verify that.
You're correct, Brian.
Everybody's whipping out their Demis.
The Demis. I have the Demi C. So this is the one with the interchangeable lenses, but otherwise I think it's the same. But you are correct. It has a single ring. It says 30 and then a long line all the way to 250. And it's using some kind of like fixed program AE for it. So I've actually never shot this one either.
Since we're on the topic of the Agate, two things that I think are really helpful with that. One, there is actually, the program is published in the manual. So you can see what the shutter speeds are, and it's different for the 18 and the 18K. And the other thing I only realized after several months of having it is that there is actually a hyperfocal scale on the front of the lens. It is absolutely tiny, but there's a series of notches.
Notches, yep.
Yeah, around the front that correspond to the apertures. And one could be forgiven for not noticing that.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
How many different colors?
They mostly came with yellow and black, but the original one was orange and black. I don't know. Do they come in any colors other than that?
I think there's a blue.
Because I could have sworn I've seen a green.
Yeah, I've seen the green. I've seen the green as well.
I think generally the 18Ks are yellow and the 18s are orange, but I'm not sure about the other colored ones.
Is the Agate an Agfa product? Sorry, I didn't hear that first bit.
No, I believe it's Belomo, isn't it?
It's a Belomo. It says on the little lens cap.
It's a Soviet camera.
Got it. Okay. No, it's new to me. Thanks.
It's a camera that if you first see it, it's entirely plastic. So here's the yellow. It's very, very primitive feeling. It was, Anil was commenting on how difficult they are to load. They are kind of a pain in the ass to load. The camera literally splits in half. Like it splits right down the middle when you open it up to load film in it. But if you could manage to get it loaded and you can get through a whole roll through it, for as cheap feeling of this camera, I mean, it's all plastic. It's very, very lightweight, but it does have a glass 4-element lens that takes really good pictures. So it's so unsuspecting. It looks like a children's toy, but it produces way better images than you'd expect. So if you have a chance to get one of these, and it's regular half frame, 35mm film, so it doesn't need anything special. But if you could find one, Anthony's, you're gonna have to find two because Anthony wants the first one.
Oh, they're remarkably cheap and typically sold out of Ukraine.
Well, and that's what I told him, but he said like everything he's finding is like $70 and up, so there must be a run on them or something.
No, I bought my second one like 3 months ago, and it cost me $50 from Ukraine.
Oh, send me a link.
Unless the run started recently, maybe I started that run, but
I just want to end the discussion on the memo. The Ansco memo that we were talking about, the one that Theo had, was made in the 20s. Well, in the late 30s, interestingly, AGFA made a camera called the Memo, and AGFA is a German company, but it was made in New York. So it's an American-made AGFA camera called the Memo. It uses the exact same film and the exact same cassettes as the Ansco Memo, but the camera looks completely different. It's a horizontal folding bed, kind of like a retinette. The film transports sideways. They actually made it in both half frame. Well, they would have called it single frame and double frame. You cannot switch back and forth. Whichever model you get is just what you're going to shoot. I happen to have the single frame version, and you can easily tell which one you have by looking at the shape of the viewfinder. In the single frame version, it's much narrower. In the double frame version, it's wider, like you would expect an image to be. But that's actually a really cool camera too. It's a little bit more ergonomically pleasing. It's not quite like a wooden box like the Ansco version is. They were made like 12 years apart, same film, same name, same quality images, but that's a fun one to shoot too if you happen to find the AGFA Memo. But that's really the last of the major American single frame cameras. To really continue the story, like I alluded to in the intro, you have to jump all the way to when the Pen first came out, because the Olympus really hit the ground running with those.
Before we get to the Pen, though,
sure,
both sort of straddling pre and post war, I think there are two cameras that I'd like to mention. One being the Behringer Robot, which is a square frame camera, not quite half frame, and then a camera that I've never shot, which is the 10X, the Zeiss. Do you consider square frame to be a half frame camera? I mean, all of these like sort of odd, non-standard formats, because I am absolutely a fanatic for the Behringer Robot. If you've never held one, it's actually about the size of a Rolly 35, but it weighs as much as like a standard SLR. The thing is a tank. And of course, coming from Robot, it's a clockwork wind-up camera, so that you wind it on the top.
Yep.
And get 4 or 5 shots off as fast as you can pull the trigger, which is pretty fast, actually. You can get a very tight sequence if you're shooting anything that's sort of action. It is just a rangefinder. There's no viewfinder. I mean, it is just a viewfinder. There is no rangefinder to it. So you have to be able to hyper focus or be good at guessing your distances. But again, it's a camera that had its own proprietary interchangeable lens format. It used both has Schneider Kreuznach lenses. There's Xenars and Xenons for it, and tele-Xenars, and it also was available with Zeiss sonars. There was a few people that sort of fetishized about the fact that during the war it was used by the Luftwaffe because you could wind them up and put them on a plane.
Right, that's correct.
But then it continued after the war in its original Robot 2 format. And it's just one of these cameras that I just feel like I need to be evangelical about it, because you look at it and think, oh, that's a cute little camera. It's when you pick it up and you realize these things have so much gravity to them, and they're such a heavy, well-made chunk of metal. And again, they work like clockwork. I've had 3 different Burning 2s, Robot 2s, never had a single one that didn't fire accurately as far as shutter speed goes. And it's just an interesting line that you can really go down that rabbit hole, because of course the camera continued. I mean, Robot still makes traffic cameras as far as I know, and surveillance cameras, but their sort of last hurrah were the Robot Royals that came out in the 1950s, sort of as a competitor to the Leica M3. And these were both half frame and full frame motor drive, just substantial rangefinder cameras. Again, a full complement of lenses that are as good as anything that you'll find for any other system. They tend to be pricey. And, I have one that I picked up from Paul that is the full frame version, and it's a delight to shoot. It's quirky, it's weird, it's incredibly heavy, but it is also manufactured to a level of precision that you just don't find in other cameras.
So you got the Royal 36.
Correct. I got the one that's full frame.
Okay, I had a Royal 24 also.
And I got the 36, and it's nice because you can actually use a standard film cassette in the supply, but it uses, because of the way that it pulls through the motor drive, you have to have the proprietary take-up reel because it like opens the gap for the film to be sucked into the supply or into the take-up reel.
They needed to make sure that there was like as little resistance as
Right.
possible for the motor drive to work smoothly. But I was going to point out they were used in traffic cams too for, I think, through the 80s. I don't think they did it past that.
I think they're still making them.
Really?
Yeah, I think they still are. I mean, they're just like black boxes now. They don't look like cameras.
They were traffic cameras. They were also post cameras. So they used them for postal service for documenting packages and addresses and things like that.
With the square format, though, Anthony, you asked the question, would it be considered half frame? It's half of what? That's probably the question I would ask.
Partial frame?
Well, it's smaller than 35. The only reason I group it separately is a lot of half frame cameras are relatively inexpensive, but the robots and the 10Xs are complete opposite. They're pricey.
But if we take that line of thought, and I'm about to throw a cat amongst the pigeons here, isn't a full frame 35mm frame half a X-Pan size panoramic frame? So isn't technically the full frame then the half frame?
Theo, go to your room.
Yeah, go to your room.
Do we need to watch that YouTube video to figure out cat among the pigeons?
Theo's had a lot of extra time on his hands lately, so he's had a lot of time to think too much. No, I mean, and that's why I spent the time earlier to clarify, half frame is a relatively newer term. It wasn't always that way. Originally it was single and double frame. So using Theo's logic, X-Pan could be, double frame, single frame, half frame, but no one really uses that term. I welcome all non-24 by 36 type of cameras. If you're going to mention the square frames, though, you have to also mention the Fotovit, the Bolta Fotovit, which was also 24 by 24, very, very small camera. It wasn't motor drive. But what's neat about those cameras is that even though they did use regular 35mm film, they used proprietary cassettes that the Japanese went crazy for. And they would take what they called Bolta cassettes, and they made a whole series of cameras called Bolta film cameras. And they would make this 35mm paperback film, which was very, very popular in like the 50s. So if you have a Von Cabbage collection, you probably have a whole bunch of Bolta Japanese cameras that was inspired from the Fotovit, which itself was a 24 by 24 square exposure camera.
So the 24 by 24 there were many of them being produced in Japan in the 50s.
Right.
And 60s. And at that time, basically film was either 20 or 36 exposures. So if you put a 20 exposure roll of film in it, that gave you 40. And if you put 36 in it, you had 72 exposures. So we used to, the photo finishers had a joke about processing it. They had what they call the holiday roll of film, where you get a roll of film and you get it processed and you have New Year's Day, Easter, 4th of July, and Thanksgiving and Christmas, all on the same roll of film.
Very true.
So, I mean, obviously that was something that you dealt with a lot in the half frame world.
Don't forget the trip to the Grand Canyon, Paul.
Oh yeah, the other one was, Ray, do you remember Elford's short-lived 72 exposure roll of film?
Yeah, I do.
Elford made a roll, a one emulsion of black and white film that came in 72 exposure rolls, a very thin emulsion. And I know a guy that actually put one of those in a half frame camera. So he had 144 exposure on one roll of film. The film wasn't bad. The problem was that you couldn't hang it to dry, because it was 12 feet long.
Yeah, I was gonna say, how do you develop it?
You had to cut it in half, and
you just had to blindly sacrifice one exposure, because there's no way you'd know where to cut between frames before you develop it.
Plus, you'd have to, your kids would inherit the rest of the roll of film because you'd never get it finished and have to actually process it for you.
So something I think is interesting is, we talk about digital, spray and pray. I have no problem pulling out my Z5. I could shoot 200 pictures like that at a family event. But ask me to finish a 72 exposure roll of film in a half frame camera, and I can't do it. I don't know what the mental block is that I should be able to use that same principle that you would with digital when shooting half frame, but I don't seem to ever be successful.
You know what the thing is? It has to be a camera that you really like to shoot, something that's really beautiful. And I actually brought one with me today because I absolutely love this camera. And it's a Agfa Optima Parrot. Is an absolutely gorgeous little camera. It's half frame. And interesting with this one is it's actually, there you go, you got a black one there, Mike. It actually has a meter on it, which is selenium, but it's got LEDs in the actual viewfinder. So you can it actually meters for you, and based on the power it's drawing from the actual selenium cell, it's actually powering the LED inside to actually let you know whether you're going to be underexposed or correctly exposed. So that is, and it's just this gorgeous little camera, especially if you get the chrome one. I prefer the chrome one. I know you have the black one there, Mike.
The Optima is chrome and it has the meter. This is just called the Parrot 1. So it does not have the meter, but it's the same body.
Yes.
And it's manual everything. You have to select shutter speeds and f-stops and everything. So it's completely mechanical.
It's about as minimalist on the top as you could get. So it's absolutely fantastic. I love this camera.
I agree. It feels wonderful in the hands. It has a hot shoe. I love the ergonomics of it. The images it makes are really nice. And even though I have the black body, the chrome on it just really, really shiny and just it feels substantial.
So, Mike, can we talk about the elephant in the room? And that is, I'm a half frame fanatic. I probably have 15, 20 half frame cameras, never shot an Olympus pin. And I am bewildered by the different models over the years. I know that there's an Olympus pen wide that I would love to have, and I see one there with Ray.
Yeah, Ray's got one.
That is like the camera that I would, maybe when I'm in Japan this year, I'll stumble across one and be able to hold it and make sure that it's working, because they are a little bit pricey. But can you or anybody else sort of give an overview as to what to look for if you're looking to get into the Olympus pen? Because they didn't they make them for like 30 years or 25 years? It's extremely long run on that product line, and there are at least a half dozen, if not more, iterations.
Two types of pens you could talk about, though. I mean, let's sort of break it up for everybody here too. It's the actual SLRs. So there's the Pen Fs and the various models, including that wide one, which is the SLRs. You can get the ones with the standard script at the top, but there's also the ones with that really fancy script, like on what Ray has also got on the actual lens cap.
Yeah, this is, so there's an F and there's an FT. So the FT doesn't have the script. The F does have it. The FT has a meter. The F does not have a meter. So, and right now, to be honest with you, I was on a buying kick the past probably year and a half on buying as many broken Fs as I possibly could find. It just seems everyone I picked up was working, and I get it home and they stop working. So I probably have 30 of them ready for service right now.
Now, I've never actually handled an FT. I've had a couple Fs. But what I've heard is because the FT has the meter, it makes the viewfinder darker. Is that true?
A little bit. Actually, I've never shot the original pen. I have both an F and an FT, and it is just slightly darker.
It is. Okay, so it's not a huge difference then.
No, it's not.
Okay.
Do you want me to send you an FT?
Sure.
Okay.
There's also the FV, isn't there? That was like, isn't it similar
It took the light meter back out.
Yeah. What is the difference other than that between the FV and the F?
I think the FV is basically the FT, but without the light meter. So they keep the self timer. It looks a lot like the FT, but it doesn't suffer from the view. It has the same brightness in the viewfinder as the original F. I think that was the.
Is it a single stroke or?
I believe everything after the original is single stroke.
There's also a bunch, I've noticed that I purchased a bunch of FTs that were made for industry or medical that do not have the self timer, which is interesting. And even though the shutter gate, the film gate is completely full, they change the focusing screen and they mask the focusing screen as a circle. So it's recording a full frame of film, but as you look through the, the mirror box, if you would, it's a circle. I have two of them. I have a chrome and a black, and I was really considering replacing and having it, service. So it's a conventional, but the more I think about it, I don't think I want to do that. I want to keep it as original as an industrial camera, kind of a neat thing.
I don't think I realized, or maybe I didn't just forgot, that the later ones were single stroke. Because again, I only have the F and they're all double strokes. And normally I don't care. I don't have a strong opinion on a single versus double strokes, but something in my mind about a half frame camera also being double stroke just seems ridiculous. Like to me, the reason they went on like the Leica M3 with the double strokes is to put less tension on the film, less torque. But I mean, you're only moving the film 18 millimeters. Like, why do they need to do 2 strokes on that? But
because it's smaller.
I guess, yeah. But it just feels weird, like having a double wind a half frame camera.
It's ridiculous, but it feels nice.
It is nice. Yeah, it does.
I'm on the side. I'm a fan. It's the first double stroke I've ever used. And it's so nice. You get to do it twice.
It's not a half frame camera, Brian, but if you really like double strokes, then you'll really love the Kodak Signet 40. It's a triple stroke.
Oh, the Chevron is like 5 pumps.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm with Brian on that one. I've got the double stroke M3, and I just love doing that twice. But on the Pen FT, now, can someone actually answer this question? And I sort of know the answer. The lens has the usual aperture, and you've got your film speeds and all that sort of stuff that you set. But when you look through the meter on the FT, look through the viewfinder on the FT, it has a meter panel on the left-hand side, which goes 1 through to 7.
Correct.
How does that relate back? Or have I...
Arbitrary scale. If you look on the bottom of the lens, it has the actual f-stops on the bottom of the lens. But the 1 through 7 is just an arbitrary Olympus.
You've mentioned that to me before, but this does not.
Well, you've just got like an Australian lens. That's just screwed.
Lens made by Foster's, right?
We export to Foster's, so it wouldn't be Foster's. But anyway.
The early lenses didn't have the numbering. So lenses made for the original Pen F didn't come with that special numbering system. It was only introduced with the FT. So if you have an original F lens on an FT, you won't have the numbers, and you have to kind of figure out how to do it. Or conversely, if you have an FT lens on an F, you'll have the numbers, but nothing to use them, no meter. So you can just look on the bottom.
Of course, I had to go look, and yeah, my F camera lens has the numbers 1 through 6 on the bottom. So
Theo's got a mutt. He's got the wrong.
Well, I do too.
But yours is an F.
I should swap with Theo. Mine's an F, but I have the numbers.
Mine does not.
Okay, so they have the 1 through 6, but on the underside, doesn't it have f-stops?
Yeah, that's what we're saying. On the FT lenses, yes.
Yeah, on the top of the lens, there is an aperture, but on the bottom,
yeah.
But it's not like the Minolta autocord where they would have one number on the shutter speed, one number on the aperture, and you had to add them together. There's no adding, right?
No, there's no adding.
Okay.
I mean, I feel like you could do a whole episode about the different ways that the EV system has gone off the rails and ruined the lives of photographers throughout the ages.
I often wonder how many people read every review I've written. I'm sorry for anybody who's done that, but I feel like I've said it probably 40 times how much I hate the EV couplings on practically every camera. Like,
it's ruined so many good ones.
Yeah, and one of them that I think is one of the worst is the Kodak Retinas. I just hate it. You have to like use your fingernail to like pry it back and move it just to change an f-stop. It's ridiculous. Whereas
and if you use the auxiliary lenses with it, it's even worse.
Some companies were less annoying than like none of them are good. They go on the scale of mildly annoying to horrible. But
for worst, I would nominate the Wera or Vera 3 and 4, which have interchangeable lenses, and the release for the lens is right next to the unlock for the rings.
Yes.
And you push the wrong button, your lens just falls off.
Brian, it is hilarious you say that because I am shooting a Vera 4 right now, and I did not lose the lens, but I have experienced what you're describing.
It takes what otherwise would be a fantastic camera
Yeah.
and just makes it unusable.
Well, if we can get back to the original non-SLR pen, can we get just like a quick commentary, like a buyer's guide on what to look for? Which is the one, what's the sweet spot if you're looking to get into half frame and you want to get an Olympus pen, not splash out on the SLR, but to get like the point and shoot version? Where does one start?
The cheapest point and shoot is basically an automatic camera with a big selenium cell in the front of it. Those are always the cheapest. Those are always the ones that are broken or claim they're broken. Besides things like then they went to the S series, which has aperture and shutter speed, no problem. One thing that I'm starting to realize is there was a whole bunch of cameras that were not made for the US market, like the D2, D3 series, which also offer faster lenses. So they're 1.7 lenses. This is about the size of a Rely 35, but with a stop faster lens. So even so the W has a 2.8 lens and some of them have a 3.5 and they are, relatively the same size, but the D2 and D3 series, which again, if it's to my understanding, never made it into Olympus USA for distribution. Remarkable lenses, picking up a faster lens, cosmetically coming out of Japan. Their mint condition cameras are poor in the US, but for under $100, you can find yourself a very good deal. No problem.
I'm looking at a D3 right now, and boy, what an attractive camera. It's got like a two-tone body.
Yes.
The viewfinder and where the cell is black. The rest of the body's chrome. And then you see the larger f1.7 lens.
Yep.
That's pretty.
It also has a built-in exposure meter, which similar to the Rely 35, you have to remove the back camera, the film plate, to change the battery, but it's only the exposure meter.
Has anyone shot the Ken EED, which is like it's got the D2, D3 lens, but with the automatic exposure, like the EE series?
I think that's the best looking of all the pen cameras, and I would have got it, but I think it's automatic only. It doesn't do.
Yeah, it is automatic only.
One that's not automatic and it's probably undervalued to some extent is the Pen S.
Yeah, the S is a nice camera.
It's a beautiful little camera, and I got really lucky with this one because I saw it on eBay once, and it was going for $7.
Wow!
This was a few years ago, and it was from a seller from Pakistan, which was why I think they were reducing it because there was people going, "Oh, okay." I thought $7, protection's on, so I'll order it. This thing arrived about 2 weeks later, $7, free delivery. I have no idea how they got this thing even to Australia from Pakistan for that price. It must be someone was traveling with it and for $7, I've had this thing and it's been faultless. It is a beautiful little camera. It's been serviced and it's a great camera because it gives you full manual control. It's got a 3 centimeter 2.8 Zuko lens. It's you've got the aperture and you've got your speeds. There is no light meter, so it just puts the control back in your hands for half frame, and it is really, really nice.
So I would say, Anthony, the original Pen or the S are nice because they're mechanical. You don't have to worry about auto only. The EEs, I think all are auto only because I have an EES and I'm lucky mine still works. I don't know, Ray, do the Ds, do those support manual exposure?
The Ds are all basically mechanical. They do have a built-in exposure meter. So life is good. Yes.
Right. So, I mean, honestly, I kind of want a D3. So, Paul, see if you can find one in your basement.
So, on the topic of the Pen W, I think there's an interesting segue from that. That's famous for the 25 mil wide lens. There's another maker who made 2 different 25 mil lens half frames.
Ricoh?
Yes, the Caddy and the Auto half. And I think the Caddy is kind of an interesting, overlooked camera in many places for, pretty good specs coming out of a half frame. Although I will say it's bigger. I've only physically held one once. It's bigger than I thought it would be.
I had the Ricoh Drive, and yeah, it was a much larger half frame camera than I was expecting. Kind of an interesting one where it has the auto drive mechanism on it. Clockwork drive.
Sorry, I have the Ansco version, and it's about the size of a pack of cigarettes. I think it's the same version that Theo has, but with a less psychedelic covering.
They made like 6 different versions of the Auto half with different features. It's all fixed focus. I have one, but it doesn't work. It's kind of broken.
There's a version of the Auto half that has a 1.7 lens also. It's really weird looking because it still has that tiny body with a large lens on it. It's very
Ray, I don't know whether I should thank you or curse you, but I'm sitting here on eBay looking at D2s and D3s and thinking, I can afford that. That's not bad at all. That is a cool little camera.
Cool little camera.
Changing brands. Now, this is unobtainium for me, but has anybody ever even held a Ducati?
Yes, I have.
An Italian half frame camera? Do you have one, Ray?
I had one for like an hour and a half.
Is that the same Ducati that makes the motorcycles?
Yes.
It is? Okay.
Yeah, I was offered a lot of money for it. So everything has a price point. Everything's for sale.
So what's interesting about the Ducatis, because I did hold one too for a moment at Von Cabbage's, is it is tiny. I mean, it's half frame, but it's, I think, smaller than a pen. I mean, they shrunk that camera down. If you consider what actually it was Virgen created the Raleigh 35, what he was able to do with a full frame camera, but in a small body. Imagine what he could have done if he actually tried to design a half frame camera as small as he could. And that's kind of what the Ducatis look like. But Anthony, do not go on eBay and look for the prices for those.
I think it's interesting because it's the only, if I'm not mistaken, the only rangefinder interchangeable lens half frame.
It might be.
That is not based on an existing full frame design, because I got to get the Konica auto dash reflex out of that pool.
That's an SLR too. It's not a rangefinder.
Good. Yeah. So, all right. So it is the only interchangeable lens rangefinder half frame.
You're probably right. Yeah.
Didn't someone tell me during the week that the Konica 3 rangefinder also has a mask to shoot half frame?
The 3M does that.
3M. Okay.
The one that has the flip up meter had you could buy a half, or I think when it was new, it came with a mask. I don't think you had to pay extra for it, but you had to put it in before, like, so you could not swap it mid roll. You had to put the mask in before loading in the film, and it would shoot half frame. And that's a double stroke too. So with the mask in, you only had to stroke once for each half frame.
We interrupt this episode for the halftime entertainment and a message from our sponsors. For the halftime entertainment, we have So what's that? What, Rihanna's not going to sing because we're only paying half her normal rate? Oh, don't think. Oh, jeez. That should be sorted out earlier. Okay, talk about half-assed. All right, the halftime entertainment obviously will not be going ahead, but instead a message from our sponsors. If you're after bits, bobs, lotions or potions, head over to Paul Rybold's eBay store. Now we return you back to your regular programming.
I remember why I put not based on a full frame camera. The Nikon S3M, rangefinder half frame, but based on full frame.
Correct.
Or the Leica 72.
Leica 72.
Or the Leica that I bought from Igor last month that is marked 18 by 24, but only counts to 36 on the counter.
Really?
I should have brought it. It's a Zorky, Leica with all this, Nazi engraving on it and skulls, and on the top plate of the camera, it's engraved 18 by 24. It's pretty comical. I didn't bring it. I'm on the road right now, so I only grabbed a few cameras, seeing how it wasn't truly a half frame camera. It just marked as sets,
VEB Penacon did that to a couple Practicas. You can actually find a couple very rare half frame Practicas. A lot of times I think that was done for like medical purposes where they really only needed a single image and they just wanted to maximize how much film you could get on there. Wasn't necessarily for the same reason the Japanese liked half frame, but it seemed to be kind of a popular mod that was available on some SLRs.
Nikon made an FM half frame.
Interestingly, so did Pentax. I was trying to research if anybody didn't make a half frame, but the Nikon S3M and Pentax had a Pentax MF that was a half frame version of the ME, I believe, that was for medical scientific use only.
Paul, you were referring to the Nikon F half frame?
Yeah, FM.
FM. Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
It was actually, they were made for the Norwegian Police Department, I think. I saw one in Yorkshire back in the late 80s, a wonderful camera store in Harrogate. And I was amazed. I couldn't figure out what it was. I mean, it just looked like an FM, but he had a really high price on it. And I opened the back, and it was made at the factory for half frame.
Okay, so if we're talking about cameras that use smaller than normal images for police or medical purposes, didn't Polaroid make some film pack cameras that would shoot like 4 exposures in like a grid? Wasn't that something for like driver's license photos or something?
Yeah, passport.
The passport photo ones.
There you go.
I thought you were going for the Mamiya half frame pistol camera.
The pistol camera, yeah, that Ira showed. That was neat.
Mikey, you opened the door for me to talk about the Agate's sexy East German spy counterpart, and that's the Pinty. And this isn't this crazy East German fashion accessory camera that was this like textured gold front that kind of looks like a compact or like a jewelry bag, and the plastic around the edges came in like 5 different colors. I've had like a blood red, like the blood of the proletariat red, and there's a turquoise and a yellow, I think, and a black, as Theo has.
There's a white version.
And what I like about it is, as Theo's holding his up, it is not only is it stylish, but it has that quasi Vitessa combi plunger.
Mhm.
So that, for the advance, you just have the little stick that sticks out the side and you press it in. And at least mine is, are those carrot cassettes that you just sort of push the.
Yes. Well, they called them rapid at that time.
And you just push the film in. There's no spindle in it. And it's really designed only to do like 18 35 millimeter exposures, so like 36.
How big of a pain in the ass is it to load those canisters?
Oh, you just push it, you just shove it in. Like literally, I bulk load onto one roll, and then you put it in a changing bag and just shove it into the other cassette. When you get to the end, you snip it off and you're ready to go.
The only catch is don't put too much in. Like you want mentally, it's got to be about equal to a normal 12 exposure 35 millimeter. So whatever.
Yeah, you want to do about a 2 foot strip.
The counter goes to 20. So
And you need 2 cassettes, or you can use one and a regular.
No, you cannot fit a regular cassette in there.
You need both special. Okay.
But it's a lot of fun to shoot, and it's again sort of like the agate. It punches above its weight, and that I always am surprised at how nice the images look that come off of that camera. They are a little bit fussier. I've had a couple that broke, but I've got one that, again, I got from Paul that works perfectly fine and has been reliable. And boy, it gets looks when you pull that thing out, because it does not. It looks like something out of Barbie's Playhouse. I mean, it does not look like a camera that anybody expects.
So don't hold me to this, but I think Adam Paul told me that as a substitute for a rapid or a carrot cassette, if you can find a generic Kodak disposable single-use camera and break it open, the cassettes that those came in were smaller than normal 35 millimeter cassettes. So if you've ever opened up like a Fun Saver, there actually is a cassette in there, and they're plastic, but they're smaller than a normal cassette. And I think he told me once that you can just stick that in a rapid camera and it'll work too.
Just be careful you don't electrocute yourself while you're opening these things.
Don't right. Another tip, if you're looking for rapid cassettes, a camera that's really, really cheap on eBay that usually has one in it is called the ISO Flash, the Agfa ISO Flash. I mean, it might as well be a disposable camera. It's a really, really cheap, basic, all plastic, single shutter speed, fixed focus camera. Ironically, it's 24 by 24. So if you're on a budget and want to try square format 35 millimeter, that's a fun camera to play with. But they use the rapid cassettes too. And if you're just trying to build up a supply of them, you can usually find those for pretty cheap online.
The popularity, we were dancing around the popularity of half frame, particularly in Japan. Was it strictly economics? Was film so much more expensive, or so expensive, that half frame became popular? Or was it an easy way from a manufacturer, here's another instant format. We can just cut 35 in half and we got a whole new world.
It really was expensive. I actually attempted to figure this out once before. I found a Japanese ad from the late 40s for Konica, which, back then was Kanishiroku. They made Sakura film, and I found a roll of Sakura film. It was 12 exposures, and I was able to figure out what the conversion ratio was from Japanese yen to US dollars then. And then I use an inflation calculator to calculate what that compares to today. And for a single 12 exposure roll in Japan using modern day US dollars, it was close to $60. So I'm sure I'm making some liberties, but let's say I'm off by half, because this is the half frame episode. Even at $30 a roll, you could imagine people wanted to be economical. So that's also the reason why the little hit cameras, the Toko Tones, the micros, there were so many sub-mini cameras that were popular in Japan. is they were just desperate for anything they could do to maximize their photo shooting dollar. That's why all those cameras were so popular, including half frame. It really was expensive.
That reminds me of a book I think of when I listen to the podcast. It's a book called Photography for Everyone. It's a study of the rise of popularity of photography in general in Japan from like the turn of the 20th century, and how it kind of grew, and how, like many things in Japan, it's a very social, and it's all about clubs and about doing things together, and kind of a very different, well, obviously a very different way of growing photography compared to, here in Canada or the US, where it's all about, well, I mean, it's just it's a business, but there was more of a social and community aspect of photography.
You're actually 100% right. I mean, I'm far from an expert. Robert would know more about this. Anybody who knows Japanese culture would know better. But photography was like a cultural phenomenon for the Japanese back then. I mean, not only were they good at making it, like if you think back to post World War II, a lot of, I grew up in the 80s during the Cold War. So like everything, my education was always about the Nazis and the Soviets. They didn't teach us a lot about why Japan actually attacked Pearl Harbor and all the reasons for Japan, which is beyond the scope of this. But when Japan surrendered, it wasn't just because we dropped the 2 bombs on them. It was Russia, the Soviet Union, declared war on them at that same time. And I think the Japanese realized that if they were going to lose the war, they'd rather lose it to the Americans than have the Soviets come in and end up there being North Japan and South Japan. So they surrendered to us. General MacArthur was put in charge of SCAP, which was basically in charge of rebuilding their infrastructure, getting electricity, water flowing, hospitals. I mean, they had nothing. We decimated them. Right. So we needed to get Japan back up as quickly as possible. And in order to do that, we had to bring in money really, really quickly, as fast as possible. That's where the exchange posts, the EP cameras, were really popular. So what they did was they looked at Japan and said, what are you guys good at? And what's something we can sell that people want? And they were good at optics. Nippon Kugaku was making the rangefinders and the binoculars and the scopes, and the American soldiers would find them on destroyed battleships and downed planes. And they'd be like, this is better than what the Germans are doing. So word got around and said, hey, these people are really good at this optical stuff. And that's why cameras became such a quick thing. Mamiya was the first company to get back going. Fuji, Olympus, Nippon Kugaku, Seiki Kugaku, which was Canon, all those companies kind of just hit the ground running, pumping out cameras left and right. And that's ultimately why Japan was successful. I'm not going to jump to the conclusion of we owe Sony televisions and Nintendos and Segas and Honda Accords to Nikon, but all of Japanese industry after World War II kind of stemmed from their ability to make optical products. And culturally, they just love taking those pictures. And I think that it was, what you were saying, Richard, it was kind of in their culture.
Mike, if I could add to your history lesson there, which was great. I think it's also helpful to point out the Korean War immediately following World War II had sort of a dual impact. One, it forced more investment in Japan as a place that was close, where it would be really handy to have manufacturing capability. And second, it gave the Japanese a huge market of rich American people to sell cameras to. And that helped tremendously as well with their recovery.
If you had to credit, it was multiple people, you can't credit one person, but if you had to pick one person that was the face of the Japanese camera industry in the United States at that time, it was David Douglas Duncan. He was one of the premier life photographers. And he had a story, again, Robert could explain it better than I could, but by chance encounter, a young Japanese photographer named Jun Miki had a Leica camera with a Nikkor lens on it. And he shot a picture of Duncan at Life headquarters in Tokyo in the dark. And Duncan's like, what the hell are you doing? And he's just like, never mind. He took his picture, went home, developed it, printed an 8x10, showed it to him the next day. He looked at it and goes, what did you shoot this with? Like, he saw it was a Leica. He's like, no Leica lens can do that. He said, it's a Nikkor lens. He said, where is it made? It was made down the street in Tokyo. So Duncan and a couple other life photographers said, well, I want to see this. I want to see where these things are made. So they got a tour of the Nippon Kugaku factory, and they were so impressed with the quality of the lenses, the quality control the Japanese were doing was leaps and bounds beyond what the Germans were doing. Nippon Kugaku inspected 100% of every lens they ever made by hand. If there was even a slight bubble or any imperfection, it was scrapped and they'd start over. So that event that happened when Duncan was like, holy shit, this is really good lens, was 1 week before the start of the Korean War. So he took home these lenses, they gave them to him, and he mounted them to his Leicas. You know, this wasn't the Nikon rangefinders. These were Leica thread mount Nikkor lenses that he could put on a Leica. And the Korean War started. They all jumped on a plane and they flew to Korea, and he shot the entire Korean War using Nikkor lenses. You could still buy it on Amazon. Duncan's book, This Is War, which was literally the first widely published major publication of what war looked like. I mean, yeah, we've seen pictures of war as far back as the Civil War, but the Korean War was heavily photographed. And I'm not saying they were all Nikon lenses, but you know, Brian, to your point, that definitely helped jumpstart. You know, it took them to the next level. You know, I don't know where would we be today if those two events had never occurred. June Mickey taking that picture and then also the Korean War. I mean, maybe it still would have been popular. It just probably would have taken longer. So that's way off topic, but it's relevant though, in the sense that, you know, the Japanese culture drove the half frame cameras in the 60s. We briefly mentioned the Ricoh, the Caddy. Minolta had a camera called the Repo. Anybody have a Minolta Repo?
There it is.
He's got one in his hand. How quick is that? My favorite, I'm going to jump around here. One of my favorite half frame cameras is the Yashica Samurai.
Yep.
I was waiting for it. I was waiting for somebody to come out with that.
The Samurai?
Yep.
So the Samurai is shaped like a camcorder. You actually can hold it one-handed. It's half frame. It's an SLR. It's a fixed lens though. You can't change it, but it shoots, the film transports vertically. So it transports up and down. So most half frame cameras, when you look through the viewfinder, it's naturally in portrait orientation. Well, the Samurai is naturally in landscape, which isn't the Agate's the same way too, isn't it? Yeah. The
Agate and the, I don't want to take the conversation away from the Samurai, but it's interesting to contemplate the change in aspect ratio gave manufacturers a lot of freedom to work with in terms of rethinking the design. And the Canon dial looks like a prop from 2001: A Space Odyssey, with this like telephone dial-ish bubble ring around the lens. And you kind of has a handle that sticks out the bottom that you can wind. It's actually an auto winder, but the orientation of it is very confusing. Like when you first pick it up, you're kind of not sure where to hold it. Like if you try to hold it in one place, the shutter button's in the wrong place, or your finger's on the viewfinder. And eventually you realize that if you hold it vertically, it's actually very comfortable. And the Agate actually has very similar positioning of the shutter button and the controls across them.
Well, the Yashica Rapide also, that was a landscape format.
It's also landscape. And the only way to use that, I actually have one of those as well. I left it at my house, but there's a hand grip that goes in the bottom of the camera. Without the hand grip, as the dial has the spring loading advance that you'd hold on to, if you don't have the handle, it's nearly impossible to hold.
Yeah, and the sequel too is like that, right? Also,
And the Terran Chic.
Yes. Yeah, that's what I was thinking about. It's the Terran Chic. There it is. You don't have the gripping.
So I don't. I have the Chic. I have the Sequel. I don't have the Rapid though. And I don't have the handles for either of them. The Terran works. The Yashica does not. This is a weird one. It looks like a motion picture camera, but it's just still picture.
So anybody have a Ricoh Caddy?
I don't know.
Something I like about it is that it's a 25 millimeter lens, which is the same as the Pen W, but it's a little bit less expensive if you can find one on eBay than a Pen W will be.
I very nearly bought one last year, and it came down to that or a Pen F, and I went with the Pen F. But I will say I was surprised by two things with the Caddy. One, how flat the front lens is and how nice that is. But two, how big the body is, kind of compared to like a Pen.
So it's got a 25 millimeter lens, but is it a 2.8 f2.8, Sean?
Yes, it's selenium meter, which is nice. It's a cold shoe, but you can see the yeah, I've got my little level thing in there, but
it looks kind of big for a half frame though. Is it a little bit, how does that compare to a Pen?
Here's a Pen D3. So you can see it's got a
little bit wider,
quarter inch centimeter, something like that width, but it's actually less deep, at least than a Pen D compared to a EE or something like that. Is one of the things I like about these is that they're they're very shallow. So I think for a 50s or 60s camera, I think it's pretty rare to be able to potentially carry them in like a back pants pocket or something like that. But a lot of these, I think, really can work that way.
So, Sean, you just joined us a few minutes ago. You missed the first half, but you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, thanks. I'm Sean. I'm from Pittsburgh, and I don't know. I had a history with photography because I learned darkroom work in high school, and I worked at a 1-hour photo lab, and then I set it aside and picked it up again during the pandemic, and started buying broken cameras to tinker with and that kind of thing.
Very cool. Good time to start as any.
Yeah, I mean, it's great. I have small kids, and it was especially good during the pandemic to have a reason to just take walks, and they could play at the playground, and I could take pictures of things, and that was a good way to occupy our time. I did want to. This is. I had to show off my agate with an attached lens. This is a Nikon conversion lens for the Nikkor 8F, which is a 8mm movie film camera, but it's got a 22mm thread, and I wanted to try shooting 8mm film, and I found out that one had the same thread size, so I got one that came with the conversion lens, and it is heavily vignetted, but it does actually work in focus. So one of the things I love about the agate is that it's got a thread, and I've shot black and white with it with red filters in it and that kind of thing. I think it's part of what makes that camera so special, is that it feels like a toy but can work like a tool in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
Can you explain a little bit more depth what you did with that lens, and you literally just threaded it on? It's the same mount that you would use for like an 8mm Bolex lens?
No. So I don't know that much about movie film cameras, so I don't know the diameter of like a D mount or a C mount, but there's one 8mm Nikon film camera, which is called the Nikkor 8F. There was the Nikkor 8 and there's the Nikkor 8F, and the 8F has a 22mm thread, and then they sold this attachment lens for it, zoom conversion lens 0.8 to 2x. Yeah, I guess it is. It's this is from 8mm to 20, but the lens, I don't know my optics, but the lens it's like looking through binoculars or something. It's in focus as you slide it in and out, and so I shot some test pictures with it, and like I said, especially if you have it at the 20mm end, then you're really getting like a circle in the middle of your already very small half-frame frame. But it has a certain like ominous surveillance kind of look to it that is fun. And I think it's just the novelty of having a zoom lens on a camera that, by all rights is a toy.
You said you screwed it on, but I'm looking at my agate and it's not threaded. So are some of them threaded?
Oh, really?
Some of them are and some of them aren't.
Okay. All right. See, mine's not.
Mine's not either.
On the inside of the...
You got to get the yellow one, guys. You got to get the yellow one.
Mine's the yellow one. It's not threaded.
Mine's yellow too. It doesn't have threading.
Well, speaking of odd lenses for half frames, I recently assembled a portrait lens for my Pen F out of a Industar 50 M42 to K-mount, a K-mount to EOS, and an EOS to Pen F set of adapters. And it looks a little strange. It's about twice as big as it needs to be, but...
How does that vignette?
Actually, not at all.
Really? Cool.
Not at all. I'll tell you for sure when I get the film back, but just looking through the viewfinder, I couldn't see any. It's a full frame lens, so, the Canon EOS adapter is pretty chunky, so I don't think there's anything to kind of constrict it.
How does it compare to the 100mm that you get on the Pen F? Because I've got one of those, also without the numbers at the bottom, by the way, going back to the previous discussion.
Well, I also would add that when the Pen F system came out, Olympus made a series of OEM lens adapters. So I've got the OEM Exacta to Pen F adapter, and it's really sweet because I can put the Biotar from my Exacta onto the Pen F, and it is beautiful.
Before anybody gets excited about those adapters, though, like they tend to go for about $300 at the lowest on eBay.
I found mine for like $15.
You could be waiting for quite a while. I've been waiting for quite a while,
but they work really well, and it opens up a whole new universe of lenses. Because I've even put my Topcon 50mm 1.4 on my Pen F before, and it is stunning, of course, but it's a lot of fun. To come back to something that Brian had mentioned earlier, you mentioned that you thought that the Canon dial looked like a prop from 2001. In fact, it was a prop in The Prisoner. And there's an episode of The Prisoner where he is running around the headquarters with his Canon dial. It's a lot of fun to check out. You just do a search for Canon dial The Prisoner, and you'll see all of the different images of it. But it was definitely a science fiction prop.
It absolutely looks like it.
The dial was designed to be used entirely one-handed. So it's a clockwork. You could wind it up, you could hold it in auto exposure mode and just keep firing away with one. It's a fun camera. It's a lot of fun to use. They made a dial rapid too, which looks like a normal camera, but it still uses that rotary phone style metering system.
There's actually two versions of the dial. There's the 35 and the 35-2. In addition to that one, the 35-2 has a higher ISO. One of the things that's really nice about the dial is the viewfinder. You've got on the left side going down, it shows your focus distance, and that's not something that you often get. It has parallax lines, and then across the bottom, it shows you aperture for kind of if you're in auto settings, and it's full auto or manual. A little button on the front that pops out.
Right.
Now the dials were initially brought in by Bell and Howell, or were they brought in by Canon?
Correct. No, Bell and Howell.
Bell and Howell.
Wow. Yeah, this is Bell and Howell.
I have a dial 2, and it's a Bell and Howell.
The dial's a great camera. The one flaw of the camera is that they took a cue from Raleigh and they put the battery compartment inside the film compartment. So if the battery ever dies, you got to open up the camera to swap it out. But otherwise, it's a really neat camera. I wanted to say one last thing to Sean is if you could, why don't you share some of those pictures you took with that agate with the Nikkor 8mm lens in the Facebook group, so some of the people can see that.
That's an 8mm movie camera lens.
Yeah.
That has popped up at different camera shows on tables. Oh, look at this Nippon Kogaku special lens. And it's like, yeah, it's that funny looking little square, like transistor radio looking 8mm.
Ray, did Mamiya make it for them?
I can't talk about that.
Speaking of radios, I nominate the Chaika 3 as the camera that looks like a 1970s clock radio.
I wanted to bring up the Chaika 3. I like the agate, I really do. It's a nice camera, but this is my favorite Soviet half frame camera.
Really?
It's surprisingly solid. I mean, it's a heavy camera for being half frame. I love the front shutter release. It's got this huge shutter speed dial on the top. Mine has a meter that actually works.
You say all these things like they're good things.
I love this camera. I really, really like the Chaika 3. It's got a removable lens, but they never made another lens for it. So it was supposed to be for an enlarger, but I don't know if they ever made that.
But it's M39, so you can use it on any enlarger you want.
That's true, right?
In fact, you're getting a free enlarger lens with your camera. That's like the only good thing I could say about it.
He doesn't like it. I do. I got great images from this one, and I think it's fun to shoot.
I have a version that doesn't have a viewfinder. It's original.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
The Chaika?
Yes.
It's either a blind photographer bought it, or maybe some kind of.
I know, it reminds me like the robot, the industrial robots that, it's just a very well-made camera.
We haven't heard much from Keir. Do you have any favorite half frames you want to share with us?
I actually don't have any half frames. That's why I've just kept quiet.
Okay. Well, enjoy listening. If you had a wish list for camera that could be half frame, do you have one that you wish would be half frame?
Actually, probably what I want from hearing this discussion is a pen, because I've been really enjoying playing with the Trip 35. And if the pens are anything like this,
they're very similar. Yeah.
Yeah. So that would definitely be on my wish list, because this is my go-to, just point and shoot, snap, 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 and burn through film like it doesn't cost what it actually costs nowadays. So half frame of that would be great.
In my opinion, the Trip 35 is like a double frame, half frame pen. So there's a lot of similarities between them too. So yeah, the D3, it's probably the one that I'm lusting after. A Pen S is nice because they're not that expensive and they're fully mechanical. I would stay away from the EEs unless you absolutely are sure the seller guarantees that the meter works. But there's enough to try out.
And if you're going back and forth between the Trip and the Pen, just be careful to remember which one's which so you don't double stroke it and break it. I have a 35 RC, and I can't tell you how many times I've picked it up and tried to, like, it takes me a second to wonder where the second stroke is and why it won't work. And then I'm like, oh yeah, it's different, wrong camera. But the feel is so similar.
We mentioned the Soviet cameras before. One that I've been shooting for quite a while and enjoyed a lot is the Micron. I think it's Fed. Yeah, Fed Micron. These are great little cameras.
Did you know that that's a copy of the Konica Eye?
Yes, and the Konica Eye, I was getting to that. The Konica Eye with a famous symbol. And Mike, what does that symbol look like?
Knockers. 2 episodes in a row.
Hey, sexy, come on.
I don't want to be canceled.
Apart from Ray, who cannot answer this, did Mamiya make ever a half-frame camera?
The sketch count? I mean, it's square frame, but it's less than standard frame.
No, not the sketch.
They made a police half frame that was pistol shooting.
No, and not the pistol shooter. Sorry, that's quite unique. It's the mirror pit, and it's the only half-frame camera apart from that pistol one, which is something totally different that Mamiya ever made.
So how about this trivia question? 2 different half-frame cameras, each of which has 2 separate taking lenses.
The Fuji TW3.
Yep, that's one of them.
And the Konica
recorder,
yes. Oh, the recorder is what?
I thought that was one taking lens. This other one is a real sleeper half frame. I don't have it.
Didn't Canon?
Yes.
We talked about it on it's a Canon point and shoot.
Canon Auto Boy Telly.
Yeah. It's an autofocus point and shoot camera only. Auto Boy means it would be only in Japan. Somebody brought that up on maybe it was you, Brian. We've talked about this before, but they're really uncommon.
Selectable half frame or full frame, and
it's called the multi-telly here.
It went by 3 or 4 different names, yeah. But I believe it had a 35 and a 70 taking lens.
I'm starting to see a lot more Auto Boys populate in the United States right now. A lot more in the market.
Do you think it's just because point and shoots are hot, or do you think there's people know what they're getting?
I think it's because point and shoots are hot again.
I'm looking up the multi-telly. Yeah, they're, with one exception, they're all $100 and up. I'm just not willing to spend that on a 80s electronic point and shoot.
No, and I think the TWIMG or TWIMG, however you wish to call it, I think it has a fatal flaw because the battery is like soldered in it or not easily changeable.
You can resolder a battery in it.
That's how the Fuji TW3 is. It's really easy. Another camera, it's not half frame, but Canon made the solar powered Sure Shot Soul, which has a rechargeable battery, and that's replaceable too. You have to desolder it though.
And then I think Konica Recorder is the last of the ones of that kind of 80s generation before we get to the modern Kodak.
No, I have 4 or 5 recorders and nothing works. I've picked one up that worked. It's horrible. It's kind of a really cool camera.
Has anybody used one that does work?
I've never seen one.
They look absolutely beautiful.
It's very cool. It's very deceiving.
Prices are out of control on those recorders.
Yes, they are.
Yeah.
They've been like that for a long time, and they don't work, which is weird.
I've never seen one work.
Sean, what were you going to say?
Oh, I've got a multi-telly, and I've used this a fair amount actually. It's a 35 and a 60 lens, and it's been reliable. I think it's a little bit newer than the TW3 and the Konica Recorder.
Oh, it's big, yeah. It's a huge camera.
It's pretty big. Yeah, and it takes full frame photos too, and you have to just decide when you put the film in which you're going to do.
So you can't switch mid-roll?
No. Yeah, the switch is inside the film compartment.
Unlike that Hasselblad X-Pan.
Is the Auto Reflex Konica the only camera that could do mid-roll switches between full and half frame? Are there any others? I can't think of one.
I think it's the only one.
Yeah.
Well, getting back to what Theo said, the Hasselblad X-Pan, you can go back and forth.
That's true. Right.
I think the LCA wide might count too, if that's...
Oh, yes, it does. It does. That's a really good point. The LCA wide does switch halfway through, but it does require a frame.
Yeah, it doesn't have like built-in baffles or something. So, yeah.
No, but you get a really interesting effect because when you switch to half frame and then you take a whole series of small shots to make a big panoramic, it actually makes a really interesting effect, especially if you're hand holding it.
I sent Mike after the Konica episode, I found an FT1 motor professional half frame on eBay that I never heard of before. An FT1 Konica motor, P for professional. It's coming out of Japan, half frame camera. I think it's down to $1,300 brand new.
Wow. Yeah, that's
Pretty
nuts.
cool, but and I believe that camera can also be switched back and forth between full frame and single shot.
So now we can talk about the Kodak H35 or whatever the thing's called. Does anybody here have one?
I think I have its Chinese knockoff. This is something I found on Pinkoi, which is like a AliExpress kind of website at some point.
Was it half price?
Why did they do that?
It's not a very good camera. I would definitely recommend anyone go out and spend their $50 on an agate instead. But it's cool that it's new.
That camera's got a plastic lens, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I would imagine it's got probably severe softening on the edges at full frame. So honestly, half frame probably makes sense. Like you're cropping it down to just the part of the lens that can produce okay image quality. Maybe that's the thought behind it. No, but here's the problem is that if those cameras are being catered to a Gen Z younger market who's trying to get back into film, the reason they're going back into film is to make prints. And you're back to the same problem we had in the 60s and 70s, where it's really difficult to make prints from half frame cameras. So I don't know. I've never had one, but I don't know who the target market is for that camera.
I think it is that younger audience.
I don't know. It's prints. I think it's scans. I think people.
It's all scanned.
Yeah, I agree.
I'll make a statement. I was in one of my dealers in Philadelphia a few months ago, and I saw the Gen Z customers walk in with a roll of 120. So you have a little bit more respect, and they're dropping the roll of film off for processing and scans and buying a secondary roll. $45 later, the clerk is, do you want to pick your negatives up? I'm like, no, that's okay. Just throw them away. So they're spending $10 a roll for the $10 to buy the roll of film. They're spending, $25 a roll to have it developed in medium resolution scan. And they're like, just throw the negatives away. So, and that's the person who, who's driving the market right now.
We bought one of those Kodaks for my niece, and she'd be, I think, about 18. And it's exactly that. It's whatever is appealing to that younger audience now with film, whatever aesthetic that they're liking out of it. But it scans, and they're not worrying about prints so much. It scans and online. But with film prices, that 72 shots, is what's appealing to the younger person who wants to shoot on film.
I think that's absolutely right. And I think a lot of the reason it's appealing to those photographers is that the same reasons it's not appealing to me and to others, maybe in my group. It's designed to give a look that is different and looks kind of lo-fi and film-y, like a disposable, basically, which is what I think many in the age group kind of identify as film.
Not about like the permanence of the image or anything like that, or the permanence of having a negative.
It's too good to be a shitty camera like the Rito Ultra Wide and Slim, and it's too shitty to be a good camera like the agate. It kind of falls in this middle space of neither bad enough to be bad good, but not good enough to be good good. And I think that's the exact reason that they like it, is it's, it doesn't look like crap, but it's definitively.
Or it's half good. How about that?
I'll get behind that, because that makes the agate just good then.
Yeah, it's regular good and then half good. Yeah, this is a discussion that's come up over and over again. I don't even want to get into it about the need for new cameras, right? We probably all saw the Pentax release in Japanese. That guy's talking about the new Pentax camera that they want to have manual wind. The guy is like, you can hear his enthusiasm through the Japanese. I don't speak Japanese, you read the subtitles, but they're making a manual advance. They spent so much time on the film advance wind. They're trying to appeal to that tactile, the new quality, and I'm all for it. I'm all excited. But I just, if the Gen Z people who are spending the money on these Kodak, the H cameras, if they could just know, how much better it could be with some of these other ones, if they're willing to give it a shot. We need to have a Gen Z episode. If any of you guys know anybody that's Gen Z, I want to talk to them. I want to have a Gen Z a Gen Z episode.
I'd like to say, actually, I'm probably the closest to Gen Z in this call right now. I'm 19, so I know a lot of people of that age group, and a lot of what people my age are trying to do with film is sort of upgrade from disposable cameras, whereas I've been collecting for years and years now. I see with friends of mine who've gotten into film, they're just upgrading from the lowest quality plastic lens disposable cameras. So it hasn't necessarily crossed their minds that there are all these fantastic from Kodak. This is a new camera. I think that it appeals more. Sorry, that sort of fell apart at the end there, but hopefully you get what I mean.
No, I think I understand. You did cut out there a little bit, but it's new, but it's old, and maybe the old but old, it doesn't have that same, shiny new object, but it's still old, Is that kind of what you're trying to say?
Yeah, I would say so. And a lot of people aren't willing to trust camera that they're buying off of eBay necessarily.
They should buy from Paul. Paul's stuff is good.
Oh yeah, I agree.
I have a lot of broken cameras.
No, this is a topic I've actually wanted to have a discussion like this before. And it's not that I'm so out of touch. I don't get it, but like, I want to learn what people are shooting and, what questions they have. Like, how can we help? A lot of people are surprised to know that I never shot film that much prior to collecting cameras. Like, I literally started this hobby one day bored on eBay. I found an old Kodak folder and said, hey, that's kind of neat. I'm going to buy it. And now I'm here. Right. So I know what it's like to get started and be completely overwhelmed. I didn't know what a Leica was. I never heard of half of the camera companies, King Regula, Miranda, all these companies. I didn't know any of it. And I asked questions and people helped me, guys like Paul and, Anthony and Theo, I met, Anthony I met through the Classic Lenses podcast. Theo's got a blog too. And this community I found to be so incredibly helpful, and it doesn't matter whether it's your first roll of film or your millionth, people are always learning and I want to help, I want to learn myself and I want to see, like, is there something I'm missing, because I'm intrigued by the Kodak camera. I kind of want to buy one. I don't have a Rito. I want to check one of those out too. So Maxwell, bring your friends on the next show.
Sure, if they'll join me.
Sure.
Maybe someone knows of someone else doing a Gen Z photo podcast that you could join forces with for one episode, like have a meetup, not a meetup.
Yeah, I don't think there is. I really don't.
Yeah, just to bring them on board, and let's see what they have to say and listen to what we have to say. Kind of
what we really want to do on this show is I want someone to come in that maybe likes a little bit of the history. Maybe some people like a specific brand. Maybe some people like to learn about half frame. Maybe some people want to learn about home developing. I feel like there's a whole untapped market of people. I just don't know. I'm 45 years old. I don't know how to reach that market though. I'm younger than some of you guys, but I'm too old to reach out to other 19-year-olds that are interested in this kind of stuff. So I feel like that's an unexplored area, because correct me if I'm wrong, there are no Gen Z photography podcasts. If there are, tell me, but
that I know of.
And I don't necessarily want to do that, but I want to at least have that discussion and learn more. So something I think would be cool for a future episode.
I think some of it has to do with collector mentality too. I mean, collectors tend to be, it seems like,
cranky.
I don't want to say older necessarily, but you don't see a lot of people cranky too. Some of the Leica people I've met are a little cranky.
There are whole subjects of cameras I don't even like to talk about because I don't want to have to deal with the nuances and the meticulousness of them. So you're not wrong.
Mike, where are you banned from? It's probably a good example.
I am banned. I got kicked out of the Zeiss Historica Facebook group, and they banned me so bad I can't even search for it anymore. And I don't even know why. Like, I tried to ask, like, what did I do wrong? And I think they didn't like it because one of the members came to my site, and because I have ads on it that are targeted to browsing history, they were seeing ads for like Depends or something. I think they got offended because I got an email saying, why am I seeing so many adult diaper ads on your website? And I'm like, I'm not doing that. So yeah, Zeiss people don't like it.
One last question I wanted to just ask, which is on the topic of modifying cameras into half frames. This question on Reddit, I feel like it's asked maybe about once a month. Somebody will say, hey, can I modify this thing? And usually the explanation for that goes, well, it's not so simple. You have the viewfinder, you have you need, some sort of mask or framing. But the real killer is the wind and cocking of the shutter. How would you sort of deal with that? So I wanted to just ask if anybody was foolish enough to try that, have any stories on that, or any other interesting tidbits relating to kind of making half frames out of full frame.
Crop it, just waste the edges. No, I mean, that's a good question. Masking would be the easy part. I mean, anybody could 3D print, or you could even just get some rigid cardboard and shove it in there. And I mean, yeah, that would technically move the film plane out a little. I don't think it would make a huge difference, but how do you overcome the winding though? Because unless you're going back to like a 30s or 40s camera that doesn't have double image prevention, how would you modify the camera to only advance 4 sprockets instead of 8? I don't think there's an easy solution to that. The Konica 3M we mentioned earlier, when you insert the mask, there's like a pin that when it detects the presence of the mask, it automatically switches from double advance to single advance. The Konica auto reflex has a lever. It's purpose designed to work that way, but to just do that to a camera that's not intended to work that way, I don't know how you do that. I mean, you'd almost have to start with like something really simple, like an Argus C3 or something. And even that has double image prevention. So maybe that wouldn't work. I don't know. That's a good question.
What if you were to modify the transport gears, take half of them away?
I mean, that's what you'd have to do. You'd have to literally redesign it because
you'd have to be a major camera repairman to be able to do that.
Right.
Radar can do it, right? Our buddy in Florida.
Radu.
Oh God, Radu. Yeah. It would cost you $9,000.
The Veras are interesting. They have a ring around the lens that you rotate to cock it. And on the bottom, there's just a simple rack that uses to advance the film. Or sorry, I think the rack is for cocking the shutter.
Yeah, but that's what it is.
I've toyed with the idea of maybe trying to do some modifications on that at some time. But it does not seem like an easy enterprise.
I really don't think it is. I don't know how you would do it. Again, it's the film advance. That's the problem. You could find a camera without double image prevention and feasibly just wind it halfway and just fire it, but you'd have to defeat basically what the camera's like designed not to allow you to do. So go get a Konica auto reflex. The prices are already escalating on those, so I don't feel bad proposing those.
Or just get a Hasselblad X-Pan.
There you go.
So with the Olympus pen, I know my understanding is the very first ones were not actually made by Olympus.
That's true.
And they were made by someone else. How do you tell those apart from is there a way to tell those apart from the Olympus pens?
There is, and I don't remember what it is.
Okay.
So there are the original Olympus pens, some have a single lug and some have a dual lug.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you that the dual lugs are all Olympus for sure.
Okay.
The single lugs, the presence of a single lug does not mean it's made by the original company, because that only happened for like 9 months. So it's very, very rare for you to find one that was made. So when Maitani created the original pen and released it, they were amazed he was able to accomplish it, but the bean counters didn't understand why anybody would want to buy such a cheap small camera, and they didn't want to risk slowing down their production line of other cameras they're making at the time, so they outsourced the production of the original pens to somebody else. But the second it hit the market, it outsold everywhere. It was just the demand was through the roof immediately, and then they had to take back the production in like I want to say March of 60 or something. There is a way to tell. I think it might have to do with the flash. There's like flash distance markings on the front of the lens. But don't hold me to that, but there is a way to tell.
Yeah, because I have a one that's a single lug with like a greenish leather, but I couldn't remember like if it's the Olympus or
Yeah, I'm really sorry. I don't know off the top of my head, but there is a way to tell. But I wouldn't hold my breath because they're super rare.
Yeah.
And it's only the Pen and the Pen S that were manufactured, but looks by the...
I don't think the S was. I mean, unless I'm wrong, I think it was just only the original model.
You're absolutely right. Yes, by Sanko Shoji.
Yeah. Real quick lightning round. Everybody, we'll do one at a time. Blurt out what the next half frame camera you're going to load up and shoot is going to be. Ready? Theo.
Ansco Memo. Here we go.
Ansco Memo. Pen D3. Anthony.
Konica Auto Reflex.
Paul.
Mercury.
Ray.
Mamiya Sketch.
Richard.
Demi, when I get it fixed.
Robert.
Pen F.
Sean.
Agate 18K.
Brian.
Agate 18K or Pen F.
Maxwell.
I don't know if it counts as half frame, but it's not standard 35 millimeter. It's just what's close. I've got a stereo realist 45.
There you go.
Hey.
All right, stereo camera. And we already know Keir doesn't have one, so we won't ask him. And Phil walked away. So
we didn't even get into whether double half frame is full frame.
well, we did. We kind of covered that at the beginning.
Well, yeah. It's double frame, remember?
It's double frame. Yeah.
Yeah, but if it's double of the same frame,
Is it quad frame? Oh.
Quad frame.
the stereo half frame, is that full frame?
Oh, but they're not the same frame.
Yeah.
There's a difference.
It's similar frames.
That's true. If you want to get into a really bizarre stereo camera with tiny images, try one of those Viewmaster stereo cameras where you get the little pinky nail size exposures that they make. This was a really fun episode. It's always interesting to see the kind of turnout we get. Really glad to see some new faces on this episode. Maxwell, thank you for coming on the show. Sean, great to see you. Keir, awesome to meet you. A couple other people came back from previous episodes. episodes. Richard, always glad to have you on. This is our 49th episode. So that means the very next episode is going to be our 50th. I cannot believe that this show has existed for 50 episodes.
That's halfway to 100.
We're halfway to 100, right? I think we decided we're going to do 3 weeks out because 2 weeks from today is the Memorial Day holiday in the United States, and it's just causing too much of a scheduling conflict for us. So the next time we record will be 3 weeks from today, but will be our 50th episode. I'm trying to get a couple special guests to join us on that episode. I haven't had luck so far. Maybe at the very minimum, we're just going to sit here and eat like stale birthday cake or something and sing happy birthday to ourselves for our 50th show. But as always, the topics and discussions on the Camerosity Podcast are decided entirely by you. We could talk about robot cameras on an episode of half frame cameras, or Mike could go into a diatribe about David Douglas Duncan and the Japanese photo industry. You just never know. So thank you guys for coming. You guys have a good night. Bye-bye.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night,
Bye,
everybody.
everyone. Thank you.
I was just watching a rebroadcast of Midnight Special number 3.
Uh-huh.
And they played the clip from Deliverance of Dueling Banjos. That song.
Right.
How many banjos?
3, I think.
1.
Really?
Yep. It's banjo and guitar.
But it wasn't dubbed.
Well, it could have been dubbed, but they play it as if it's just one guitar or one banjo.